Well, hi there! I'm here today with a pair of Kenyan Sand Boas. You might already be aware of Kenyan Sand Boas. Perhaps you saw them on our video, 5 of the best pet snakes. And these guys definitely belong on that list because they are absolutely incredible pet snakes. And today I want to talk a little bit more about them to help you decide if the Kenyan Sand Boa is the right snake for you. Overall, we give the Kenyan Sand Boa a score of 4.6 out of 5. If you've followed our other videos, you'll be aware that this is one of the highest scores we've ever given any reptile. And honestly, they deserve it. But you might be wondering, why don't they get a 5 out of 5? That's going to come down to our 5 criteria, which are handleability, care, hardiness, availability, and upfront costs. For handleability, we give the Kenyan Sand Boa a score of 4 out of 5. And honestly, the only reason that they're losing any points at all is because, well, for one thing, they're small. This female is going to get quite a bit larger than this during her lifetime, but this male, he's about fully grown. They're about as sexually dimorphic as hognose snakes are, in that the females are quite a bit larger than the males, actually probably several times as heavy as a male. And so these two snakes are about the same size right now. He's fully grown. She'll probably get to be about 4 times this heavy. So it's a very serious size difference between the two of them, but males especially are going to stay kind of small, and they could potentially be a little bit fragile if they got squeezed or something by a child. Not really something to worry about a whole lot, but it is a possible concern. This is an awesome thing about both Kenyan Sand Boas and hognose snakes, which is that you can usually tell the sex of the snake just by looking at it, even when they're about the same size like these two are right now. Like I told you, she will eventually be way bigger than any male you will ever see. But even when they're babies, you can look at their tails and tell if it's a male or a female. This one's a female, and you can see she's got kind of a short, almost triangular shaped tail, and it's just not very long. The males have a much, much longer tail than the females do, and it usually kind of comes in a little bit right where their vent is, right by their little legs, because these are a boa, they've got legs. There's a little bit of a dent, and then it kind of bulges back out, and it's a considerably longer tail. If you look at a male and a female next to each other, it's not very hard to tell which one you're looking at. And that's a really neat thing, because telling the sex on snakes can be kind of a challenge, especially when they're babies. Not so with Kenyan Sand Boas. Really, the only reason that I don't give them a 5 out of 5 is just because some of them can be a little bit bitey, and it's a little bit more difficult to tell when they're thinking about striking at you than other snakes. They tend to strike sideways. These guys in the wild, and you'll notice this even in captivity, they're going to be buried underneath the substrate most of the time with just their little eyes sticking out, and they just sort of whip that head sideways when food passes by. And that's sort of the same way that they'll strike defensively at you sometimes, and for me it's very difficult to tell that strike is coming or which direction it's coming from, so it's a little bit unnerving. My male, Sarlacc, he's fantastic. I've really not had any trouble with him. He goes out and does a lot of public outreach. He goes to a lot of shows. He gets handled by a lot of children. He's great. But this female, she's grumpy. Some Kenyan Sand Boas seem to be that way, and it's something to be aware of when you're picking one out. And that's why they don't get a 5 out of 5. But they would be close otherwise, because they're very easy to handle. They're slow, they're soft, they're not going to scratch you. Really, they're just fantastic. They're a really good size for handling, very, very manageable, but big enough that they're substantial. When it comes to care, we give the Kenyan Sand Boa a score of 5 out of 5. Really, this is as easy as a pet reptile is going to get. They need water, they need heat, they need some loose substrate. I'm not going to recommend sand, which is funny because they're sand boas. You'd think, oh, I should definitely put them in sand. And they usually do fine in sand. Most reptiles, I'm going to say, never use sand. With a Kenyan Sand Boa, you could probably get away with using sand, but it has been my experience that if that sand gets a little bit damp at all, and they have a water bowl in there, if that sand gets a little bit damp at all, it can actually get in their mouth. I came in one time and found him, and he had a bunch of sand in his mouth. And I said, that's it, I'm not using sand anymore. So I've moved to other loose substrates. I've had great success with them. We've actually got links to them in the description. A good lid. You're gonna need a good lid, because if you don't have a good lid, you're not gonna have a snake anymore. That's just the truth about snakes. You need a good lid. I prefer a sliding lid. Once it slides into place, you know they're not gonna be able to push their way out of it. You don't need any special clamps or anything like that. I like a tank with a built-in sliding lid. And then, the last thing is mice. Much like most snakes, these guys are going to feed on rodents, and that can be a serious downside for a lot of people, but these guys are as good as it gets when it comes to a mouse-eating snake. They usually feed very readily. They just sort of, well, you can see where their eyes are sticking out of the substrate, and you just wiggle that rodent that's been frozen and then thawed out, and you just wiggle that right by their head, and they just sort of pop out, grab it, swallow it on down. End of story. They're good eaters. If you don't mind feeding them mice, this is as easy as reptile care is going to get. When it comes to hardiness, we give these snakes a score of 5 out of 5. Honestly, if you don't crush it, if you give it water, heat source, you're good to go. The basic necessities of life are what these snakes are going to need, and they're very likely to thrive for you if you supply those things for them. When it comes to availability, we give the Kenyan Sand Boa a score of 4 out of 5. Really, these are very, very available. They're becoming more available. They're fairly easy to breed. Something very interesting about sand boas, and actually most boas, is that they're live bearers. And like I told you, the females can get very large. Well, relatively. They can produce a litter of generally a dozen or more babies, sometimes up to about 40 babies, all in one litter. So they're very relatively easy to breed. You don't need to incubate the eggs or anything like that, and they can produce a lot of babies at a time, which makes them fairly easy to breed, and a lot of people are breeding them. They're becoming more and more available all the time, so much so that you're going to see them at absolutely every reptile expo you go to. There are a lot of breeders in your area that are going to be producing them, and even a lot of pet shops are going to carry Kenyan Sand Boas. They're just spectacular. If you've got a pet shop you trust, it very likely has Kenyan Sand Boas in stock, and that's really neat. I mean, they're still not quite as common as like corn snakes, leopard geckos, and bearded dragons, but they're getting close to that because they are such great pet snakes and they're relatively easy to produce. Because they are so easy to breed, even the morphs of Kenyan Sand Boas are widely available and actually fairly inexpensive. So this is a really cool snake. Of course, this is the normal Kenyan Sand Boa, and you can tell that's about the most beautiful coloration ever. So you might not even want a morph. I've been talking so much about how beautiful these snakes are, and I love these colors, and you might be thinking, well, yours isn't very pretty, but mine is actually not as bright as she is right now, only because he's getting ready to shed his skin. It's what you call in blue. And so he's kind of got a double layer of skin going because he's growing a new layer of skin underneath the old one, and the old one is getting a fluid layer in between it and the new layer so that it can slough off all like a big sock here pretty soon. When it comes to upfront costs, we give these snakes a score of 5 out of 5. Like I just told you, when it comes to buying the snake, they're actually very readily available and relatively inexpensive. One of the least expensive reptiles we've talked about, and even their morphs, the different color varieties of Kenyan Sand Boas, which honestly, I have a wild type morph because, I mean, look, it's black and orange. There aren't too many snakes that get more beautiful than that, and I am yet to see a Kenyan Sand Boa morph that I think is more beautiful than this, but there are some really, really cool morphs out there. Things like anerytheristic, albino, even snow, which is the combination of those two things. You can pick those up for not a lot of money, probably less than almost any ball pythons, and that's really neat. That is a really neat thing. So the snake itself, very inexpensive and easy to find. On top of that, housing for a Kenyan Sand Boa is very simple. They're not a very big snake, and they're not a very active snake, so it doesn't need to be a super large enclosure, and that enclosure can be pretty simple. They're going to have a loose substrate, a water bowl, a heat source, a thermostat for that heat source, locking lid. You're good to go. That's it. It doesn't get any easier to keep a pet reptile than the Kenyan Sand Boa. I love them. They're fantastic. I could very much see why a person could consider this the greatest pet snake on planet Earth. We give them an overall score of 4.6 out of 5, which would suggest to me that even we think this is one of the greatest pet snakes you could ever own. We hope you've enjoyed getting to learn a little bit more about these awesome snakes. And as always, remember to like and subscribe, and we hope to see you real soon. Hi there. I should give myself a second. I actually got links to them down in the
description.
Big enough that they're substantial. This could get exciting. Okay. Out you go then. Oh, what a good snake you are.